the Central Asian border maze. The paradox of unrecognized spaces in Cyprus pales in comparison to what happens when borders are deliberately designed to divide and control populations. In Central Asia's Fergana Valley, Soviet mapmakers created what might be the world's most convoluted border system, where villages, water sources, and roads were strategically separated to prevent unified resistance, leaving a deadly legacy that continues to this day. Unlike messy borders drawn by distant colonial powers, the Fergana Valley represents a labyrinth of lines deliberately engineered to trap communities and fragment identity. Residents navigate a reality where morning commutes require crossing international boundaries. Accessing farmland means confronting checkpoints, and water, agriculture's lifeblood, flows through pipes crossing multiple sovereign territories before reaching fields. The valley's borders weren't drawn by accident. In the 1920s and 1930s, Stalin's regime methodically divided the historically unified Fergana Valley among three Soviet socialist republics, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. The calculated goal was preventing the formation of a unified Central Asian identity that might challenge Moscow's authority. The resulting border arrangement created a jigsaw puzzle where enclaves, territories entirely surrounded by another country, became diplomatic flashpoints. The Fergana Valley contains 6 major enclaves across the 3 countries. Sok, an Uzbek territory with over 70,000 residents, sits fully encircled by Kyrgyzstan. Vorak, a Tajik community of approximately 30,000, finds itself similarly isolated inside Kyrgyzstan, connected to Tajikistan proper only via mountain passes, often impassable during winter. These artificial divisions transform everyday activities into diplomatic incidents. Farmers wake up in one country, but find their fields in another. Family visits require multiple border crossings, each with bureaucratic hurdles. Telephone networks frequently fail across boundaries, isolating communities from their governments. Water management becomes particularly problematic in this arid region dependent on irrigation. Soviet engineers built elaborate canal systems, now crossing multiple international boundaries. Upstream countries controlling headwaters gain leverage over downstream farms. Water infrastructure becomes weaponized in disputes, with countries occasionally cutting supply for political pressure. This water conflict sparked deadly violence in April 2021 at the Golovnoy distribution point on the Isfara River. What began as a dispute over access escalated into armed conflict between Kyrgyz and Tajik forces. The violence killed dozens, destroyed homes, and displaced thousands of civilians, the worst border violence the region had seen in years. September 2022 brought another wave of bloodshed along the Kyrgyzstan-Tajikistan border. Artillery and small arms fire transformed peaceful villages into conflict zones as military forces exchanged fire across disputed territories. These conflicts reflect economic reality. The Fergana Valley contains Central Asia's most fertile and densely populated areas. With scarce land and growing populations, competition intensifies for resources increasingly stressed by climate change. The human toll extends beyond violence. Communities find themselves cut off from nearby markets, hospitals, and schools that lie across political boundaries. Medical emergencies require complex negotiations to cross borders, sometimes with fatal delays. Students face impossible choices between foregoing education or relocating entirely. During Soviet times, these borders existed primarily on paper, with free movement within the single Soviet state. The USSR's 1991 collapse transformed administrative divisions into international borders overnight, complete with customs controls and passport requirements. The situation deteriorated as newly independent republics restricted movement. Simple roads became fortified checkpoints with armed guards and documentation requirements. Many rural residents who never needed international passports found themselves effectively trapped in their villages. Visa requirements compounded these challenges. Despite various bilateral agreements, many rural residents lack documentation, knowledge, or resources to navigate complex applications. Visiting relatives just miles away might require traveling to distant capitals, considerable expenses, and weeks awaiting. This border maze creates perverse economic incentives. Smuggling thrives where legitimate trade is restricted and corruption flourishes at checkpoints. Communities once engaged in mutual trade turn to black markets, undermining economic development and government authority. Perhaps most troubling are the psychological effects. Ethnic Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, and Tajiks, who once lived as neighbors, now find themselves citizens of competing nations. Centuries-old cultural and familial ties strain under nationalist rhetoric and border disputes. Despite these entrenched problems, recent diplomatic breakthroughs offer hope. In March 2024, a historic summit in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, brought together all three countries' presidents to sign the agreement on the junction point of the state borders, aiming to resolve territorial disputes dating to independence. The summit produced the Kyrgyzstan Declaration of Eternal Friendship and a symbolic stele at the junction point of the three borders. These gestures were backed by substantial agreements, particularly between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, who finalized demarcation of their entire 1,006-kilometer frontier. This agreement addresses long-standing tensions by reopening vital trade routes and establishing shared water management. The Kizilbel and Kyrgyzstan checkpoints, closed since 2021, will resume operations, reconnecting severed communities. A bilateral commission will oversee the Asfara River Basin, the water source that sparked the 2021 violence. The agreement includes land swaps, particularly around Vorak. These exchanges aim to create more coherent territories reflecting community needs rather than Soviet political calculations. For some villages, this means relocation, disruptive but preferable to perpetual insecurity. Can these diplomatic efforts succeed where previous attempts failed? The challenge remains immense. Paper agreements must translate to ground-level changes where generations of conflict have fostered deep mistrust. What makes recent agreements potentially more durable is their comprehensive approach, addressing entire frontiers while simultaneously tackling resource sharing. By linking border recognition with economic cooperation, countries create mutual incentives for upholding commitments. The March 2024 agreement recognizes that regional prosperity depends on cooperation rather than competition. For citizens trapped in border zones, these diplomatic breakthroughs offer the first realistic hope in generations for normalized relations and simplified daily life.